Would you have the courage to marry someone you already know is going to betray you? That's exactly what God told a man to do, and the reason behind it reveals something profound about God's heart. This is the true story of Hosea and Gomer, and what God did in the midst of that pain will leave a lasting impact on you. Hosea 1:1-2. God calls Hosea during a time of spiritual decay in Israel. Israel was in a strange place. On the outside, everything looked fine. Economic prosperity, political stability, and a people who, to outsiders, seemed blessed. But inside, the soul of the nation was sick. Idolatry had become routine, values were corrupted, and the people no longer listened to God's voice. It was like a beautiful house on the outside, with deep cracks in its foundation. And it's in this moment that God decides to act in a surprising way. When we think of a prophet, the image that comes to mind is of a man of prayer, maybe with a strong voice and harsh words, someone who preaches in public squares and rebukes kings. But with Hosea, God does something different. He wouldn't just be a mouthpiece from heaven, he would be a mirror, a living reflection of the pain, rejection, and relentless love of God for an unfaithful people. That's why his mission didn't begin with a sermon. It began with a marriage. God chooses Hosea at a time when most had already forgotten his voice. The people of Israel worshipped Baal, offered sacrifices on pagan altars, and corrupted their spirituality with abominable practices. Yet the Lord did not give up. He called a simple man to live a deep and scandalous drama, capable of touching even the hardest heart. It wasn't going to be a play. It would be real, with tears, with shame, with actual betrayal. Hosea would embody a living message. Imagine the scandal. A prophet of God being ordered to marry a promiscuous woman. We're not talking rumors or suspicions. The command was clear: go, take for yourself a wife of harlotry. Something that, at first glance, seemed unthinkable. How could someone who represents God unite with someone marked by unfaithfulness? But this is where the painful beauty of the story begins. Hosea would obey, and he would be hurt in the process, because his life was part of something much bigger. The historical background matters. Israel was divided. The northern kingdom, where Hosea preached, had completely turned away from God's commandments. While Judah still held a superficial appearance of piety, Israel had given itself fully to fleshly pleasures, religious corruption, and a false sense of independence. It was a people who wanted the benefits of God, but without the commitment. A utilitarian, self-serving, and ungrateful relationship. Their spiritual life was driven by convenience. They attended religious festivals, but worshipped hidden idols. They sang praises, but their hearts were far away. The people thought God didn't see, or that he would always forgive, as if grace were a bargaining chip. And so, amid this wandering, God decides to show what it feels like to be betrayed every day, not with words, with a man's life. Hosea was that man, and he wasn't chosen for his strength, beauty, or charisma. He was chosen because he was willing. God doesn't choose those who have everything. He chooses those willing to give everything. And that's what he found in Hosea, someone who would endure the deepest pain, being betrayed by the one he loved, just so an entire nation could understand what God's heart feels in the face of spiritual unfaithfulness. The prophetic calling was never meant to be comfortable, but Hosea's call goes beyond all human logic. It wasn't just about preaching, it was about living, not just declaring, but feeling. While other prophets used words, Hosea would use his marriage as a silent, scandalous sermon. A sermon that still echoes today in the hearts of those who, even after so many falls, still wonder, does God still love me? The central message here is that God is not indifferent to our unfaithfulness. He doesn't just watch from afar, he feels it. And to show that, he turns Hosea's life into a painful stage of unconditional love. Nothing would ever be the same. Hosea's life would become the message itself, love that endures, even when there is no reciprocation. And what's even more striking is that, despite all the heavy elements, the story doesn't begin with judgment, but with a covenant that would be broken repeatedly, but would also reveal a side of God many don't know, a God who loves with open wounds, who keeps investing even when there's no return, a God who goes beyond anything logic can explain. Hosea 1:2, "Go, take to yourself a wife of harlotry." The command was straightforward but absurd by human standards. Go, take to yourself a wife of harlotry and have children of harlotry. Anyone hearing that at the time would think Hosea had lost his mind, or that God had, but this was a calling that went beyond logical understanding. God wasn't just asking Hosea to marry a promiscuous woman, he was asking him to feel in the flesh what it's like to love someone who's going to betray you, a love that persists even when it knows it will be broken. Imagine obeying a calling that starts with a guaranteed wound. Hosea didn't enter this relationship naive or unaware. He knew Gomer's past, and he knew what was coming, but obedience outweighed fear. Here the Bible teaches us something subtle but profound. There are times when God doesn't call us to succeed, but to represent, to reflect through our pain, something heaven wants to say to earth. Gomer, a woman marked by scandal and a questionable reputation, wasn't chosen randomly. She was a living symbol of the nation of Israel. Just like her, the people had prostituted themselves spiritually, giving themselves to other gods, distorted values, and impure alliances. The marriage between Hosea and Gomer was a prophetic act, yes, but also a divine act of compassion. God wanted the people to feel shame, not through force, but through identification. It's as if heaven itself were shouting, "This is how you've treated me, and still I keep loving you." That unusual marriage becomes a painful dramatization of the relationship between God and his people, a people who, like Gomer, kept returning to the same mistakes, even after being embraced, even after being loved, even after being forgiven. And this isn't just a critique of Israel, it's a mirror for all of us. Maybe you've experienced something similar, not literally, but emotionally. Maybe you've loved someone who only knew how to repay you with pain. Or maybe you tried to save a relationship where you were the only one fighting. That feeling of injustice, of loving alone, is exactly what God wanted to reveal through Hosea. It's not that God wanted to punish the prophet with a painful marriage. He wanted to teach, through the life of a righteous man, the love of a father who doesn't give up. And this is where we discover something revolutionary about God's love. He doesn't wait for perfection to love. He loves before the change, before the transformation, before the response. Hosea's marriage didn't begin with a faithful wife. It began with a broken woman. And even so, there was a covenant. That destroys any idea of merit. God doesn't love us because we're good. He loves us because he is good. The love Hosea was called to offer wasn't a fleeting feeling. It was a commitment, a covenant. And the hardest part, a covenant with someone who wouldn't respect him. That makes us reflect on the real meaning of covenant. Are we ready to love someone the way God loves us? Can our faith survive the pain of rejection? Because true love, the kind that transforms, is the one that stays when there's no human reason left to stay. By accepting this calling, Hosea stopped being just a prophet. He became the embodiment of God's own heart. He began to feel the humiliation, the public shame, the weight of betrayal, everything God was already feeling in response to his people's unfaithfulness. But there's a lesson here. Even the purest love can be rejected, and still it remains love. That changes the way we see relationships, doesn't it? When obedience is costly, it shows how much we trust the one who's calling us. Hosea trusted, and that's why he didn't hesitate. Gomer came into his life not as a surprise, but as a mission that required more than patience. It required constant mercy, a stubborn love, a love that doesn't give up at the first stumble. And that love so rare today, is what God wanted to show the world. While everyone expected the prophet to choose a pure, modest woman, someone who would honor his ministry, God told him to do the opposite, because the scandal of grace has to be lived, to be understood. God isn't looking for perfection in those he chooses to love. He's looking for willing hearts. And that's what he saw in Hosea, and it's still what he's looking for today. Hosea 1:3-9. The children were given prophetic names: Jezreel, Lo-ruhamah, and Lo-ami. The story grows even heavier when Gomer starts having children with Hosea. What should have been a time of joy and family building becomes another prophetic chapter in this intense narrative. Each child is born with a name, full of meaning. These weren't just children. They were living signs, God's messages in flesh and blood, walking through the streets of Israel. The first child is named Jezreel, and that name already carries historical weight. Jezreel was a city marked by violence and the shedding of innocent blood. Choosing this name was a direct reminder to the people: I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed at Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of Israel. It was like naming a baby after a massacre. Shocking, symbolic, and intentional. God wanted everyone to see, through that child, the judgment that was coming. Then came Lo-ruhamah, which means not pitied or no mercy. Imagine the impact of calling your daughter by that name in front of the neighbors. Every time Gomer shouted Lo-ruhamah, she was, without realizing it, declaring that God's favor had been withdrawn. This daughter symbolized the breaking of compassion. God's heart, wounded by the people's continued rejection, was beginning to close the door to gentler warnings. The third child was born and received the harshest name of all, Lo-ami, meaning not my people. This was the final cut. God was saying, you've rejected me so many times that now you'll face the consequences of separation. For a people proud to be the holy nation, God's special possession, hearing this was devastating. It was as if God was signing a spiritual divorce decree in public. But there's even more complexity behind these names. Some scholars suggest that not all the children were Hosea's. That adds another painful layer to the story. He may have been raising children that weren't even his, children born from Gomer's unfaithfulness. And still, he stayed. He cared for them, supported them, named them. This echoes powerfully how God treats humanity. Even when we choose other paths, he still feeds us, still calls us, still seeks us. The prophet's home, which should have been a place of peace, became a living scene of the spiritual rupture between God and his people. Every meal at the table, every game in the yard, every time the children were called by name was a reminder of the pain God was trying to communicate. Hosea couldn't turn this calling off for even a second. His entire life was immersed in the symbolism of his mission. These children grew up in a home filled with prophetic tension. They weren't just the kids of an unusual marriage. They were characters in a story written by heaven to awaken the earth. It's tough, uncomfortable, but necessary, because only a message lived with that level of sacrifice could pierce the hardened hearts of Israel. And let's face it, there are hearts today that also only wake up when they feel pain. When we talk about Gomer as a spiritual symbol, we're talking about all of us. About our tendency to abandon what matters for what's fleeting, to trade intimacy with God for instant gratification, to act as if his love is guaranteed, automatic, even when we dishonor him daily. Gomer, with her wandering steps, is us, walking without direction, searching for fulfillment in all the wrong places. And her children, these innocent voices bearing names of pain, represent the real consequences of our spiritual choices, because every act of unfaithfulness leaves an impact, not just on us, but on future generations. It's as if God is saying, you think you're living for yourselves, but the fruits of your actions will echo in your children's lives. And how often, even today, do we see children suffering because of mistakes they never made? If this story has already touched you, make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss any messages like this. And hit the like button. It helps the channel reach others who need to know the love and truth of God. Hosea 3:1-2. Go again, love a woman who is loved by a lover, so I bought her for myself. The story could have easily ended there. A wife who didn't change, children who symbolized rejection, and a prophet trapped in a broken marriage. But God doesn't end stories like that. He writes new beginnings where the world sees failure. And once again, the command comes from above, unexpected, unsettling, and utterly divine. Go again. Love a woman who is an adulteress. The words "go again" carry a heavy weight here. It's permission to love again, knowing the betrayal was real. Gomer had disappeared. After being rescued, loved, and welcomed, she went back to the cycle of promiscuity. It wasn't an accident, it was a choice. And worse, she ended up a slave, sold as property, reduced to an object. And who finds her in that state? The very man she hurt the most. Hosea walks into the marketplace through a crowd of onlookers and mockers and finds his wife being auctioned off. Gomer's shame in that moment is indescribable. But Hosea's response is even more shocking. He could have turned his back. He could have let her reap what she sowed. He could have justified abandoning her with 1,000 good reasons. But no, he goes beyond. He pays 15 silver coins and some barley. A price that wasn't just financial, it was emotional. It was the cost of loving someone who had already broken you. Hosea's act defied all human logic. He didn't redeem Gomer because she had changed. He redeemed her because he had chosen to love her anyway. It's impossible not to see the parallel between this and humanity's story with God. How many times have we lost ourselves, sold ourselves for so little, traded the eternal for the temporary? How many times have we ended up enslaved by choices that started with tiny compromises? And yet, when we're at our lowest, in shame, in ruin, God shows up. Not with condemnation, but with redemption. He buys us back. Hosea's action shows that true love takes action. It's not just a feeling, it's a decision backed by sacrifice. He goes where no one else would go. He pays what no one else would pay, and he does it publicly. He doesn't hide it. He doesn't wait for an apology. He takes the first step, because redemptive love always goes first. That's not weakness, that's spiritual strength. This kind of love still shocks people today. The world teaches us to cancel, to get revenge, to only give what we get. But God works through mercy, and that throws everything off. Gomer's story is our story, and Hosea's act is a perfect picture of grace. Grace that finds us dirty, exposed, and broken, and still calls us back home. What's even more powerful in this scene is Gomer's silence. The Bible doesn't mention her saying a word. All we see is Hosea acting. That reminds us that sometimes shame silences us. We no longer have arguments, excuses, or the strength to promise change. All we can do is accept the love that finds us. And that's exactly what God does with us. The price Hosea pays for Gomer is also symbolic. 15 silver coins, just half the price of a slave. Exodus 21:32. In other words, she wasn't even worth the full price of a servant. To the world, she had lost all her value. But to the prophet, she was still worth redeeming. That changes everything, because in those moments when we think no one would want us, God is still willing to pay the price. When Hosea brings Gomer home, he doesn't just buy her. He declares, "You are mine again." That's more than forgiveness. That's restoration. God doesn't rescue us just to leave us in guilt. He cleans us. He renews his covenant. He gives us back our name. Hosea did for Gomer what Christ did on the cross, paid for someone who couldn't pay for themselves. And even after the fall, he gave back dignity. And as he walked home with Gomer, it wasn't just a wife being restored. It was hope being revived in front of a nation that desperately needed to remember that God's love doesn't give up, even when shame screams. Even when everything says it's over, there is a love that redeems, and it's closer than we think. Romans 5:8. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Now the story of Hosea and Gomer stops being just a tale of suffering and prophetic obedience. It becomes a portrait, a divinely orchestrated mirror of the greatest act of love in human history. The prophet who walks into the marketplace to buy back the woman who betrayed him is a living image of Jesus Christ going to Calvary to pay the price for a bride who had rejected him. When Paul writes to the Romans, he's not talking about some generic or abstract love. He's talking about a love proven in action, sacrifice, and initiative. Christ died for us while we were still sinners. That wipes out any illusion of merit. What we received at the cross wasn't earned. It was the result of a compassionate God who chose to love us when no one else would. Gomer is, in brutally honest terms, a representation of each of us. No matter how polished our lives might look on the outside, there are subtle betrayals, hidden sins, deliberate abandonments. How many times have we traded God for other loves? How many times have we put desires, status, pride, or vanity above our commitment to Him? And still, He returns. He pays, He forgives. Hosea's love isn't natural, it's prophetic. It's a glimpse into something only heaven could offer, and that teaches us something deep. We can't understand the cross of Christ through doctrine alone. We need to feel the scandal of grace, to realize that we were bought at our worst, that we were called back when we had no name, no dignity, no worth. Jesus didn't die for improved versions of ourselves. He died for who we were at our most broken. That changes how we deal with faith, guilt, and spirituality. It dismantles a religion based on performance and opens the door for a relationship based on redemption. Gomer's story isn't about what she did, it's about what Hosea chose to do. In the same way, our salvation isn't about what we did, it's about what Christ did. That challenges our sense of justice, because we want love to come after change. But God loves so that change can happen. He loves first, and that love transforms. He doesn't ignore sin. He confronts it with redemption. He doesn't condone the wrong. He reaches into it to rescue those stuck in it. That's the gospel, the good news that someone paid the price for those who couldn't pay it themselves. And that understanding changes how we relate to others too. Because if Christ loved us when we were wrong, who are we to demand perfection before we love someone? The gospel calls us not just to receive that love, but to reflect it. Not passively, but actively, with mercy, patience, and a willingness to forgive even when everything in us wants revenge. The cross is the marketplace where we stood, exposed, humiliated, condemned. And it's there that Christ steps in and says, "This one is mine." He doesn't just take us out of shame, He covers us, gives us back our name, and sets us on a new path. Hosea's act is the trailer. The cross is the full movie. The difference is that now, the story isn't about a prophet and a woman. It's about the Creator and His creation. The theology behind this story leads us to an uncomfortable place, admitting that we're more like Gomer than we'd like to believe. But at the same time, it gives us the deepest relief. Even so, we were loved, we were chosen, we were redeemed. And we are still called to live like people who've been rescued, with gratitude, with reverence, with a willingness to love the way we've been loved. When we realize we were bought with a price beyond measure, we stop walking around like we're worthless. We start living with purpose, and we carry the name of the one who loved us when no one else would. Have you ever felt unworthy of God's love? Have you ever wandered so far that you thought there was no way back? Gomer thought she had gone too far, but that's exactly where Hosea found her, and that's exactly where God finds you. If this story spoke to your heart, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and leave a like. And now tell me in the comments, have you ever experienced a rescue like this from God? I want to hear about it. God bless you.